Somewhere near a flooded river, an old soldier is facing the hardest morning of his life. His name is Joshua. He must lead a nation across the Jordan into a land of walled cities and giants. And in one short chapter, God says to him 3 times over, "Be strong and courageous." Scripture does not tell us whether he slept that night, but it is not hard to imagine him lying awake, listening to the water in the dark. Tonight, we walk with him through the river that stopped flowing, around the walls that fell without a blow, into the quiet mercy hidden inside the fiercest book of the Old Testament, and we will build something as we go. 12 stones, taken from the middle of the Jordan, placed one at a time, the way Israel built her memorial of remembrance. 1 stone for each chapter of our night. When the last stone is set, you may do what this book was written to give. Rest on every side. The river is waiting. Pick up the first stone. Stone 1. Moses, my servant, is dead. The book of Joshua begins with a funeral. Not the funeral itself. We never see it. The book opens in the days after, in that hollow season that everyone who has ever buried someone knows too well. The season when the world keeps moving and you do not understand how. The tents still stand. The fires still burn. The children still play in the dust between the camps. But the man who held it all together is gone. For 30 days, the people of Israel wept for Moses on the plains of Moab. 30 days of mourning, the honor given to the greatest of leaders. And then the 30 days ended. And the silence that followed may have been heavier than the weeping. Because here is the question that must have been sitting in that camp, even if no one said it out loud. What do we do now? For 40 years, Moses had been the answer to every question. When there was no water, Moses prayed, and water came from the rock. When there was no bread, Moses prayed, and bread fell from the sky. When Pharaoh's army came behind them, Moses lifted his staff, and the sea stood up and made a road. He spoke with God the way a man speaks with his friend. His own face shone with borrowed light when he came down from the mountain. The last chapter of Deuteronomy says it plainly. There has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses. And now he was gone, buried by God himself in a valley no one could find, in a grave no one could visit. The people could not even stand at his tomb and grieve. They could only stand at the edge of the Jordan, looking across the water at a land full of enemies. Somewhere in that camp, one man felt the weight of it more than anyone else. His name was Joshua, son of Nun, and I want you to see him clearly, because many of us remember him wrong. We remember the conqueror, the general, but at the start of his book, he is none of those things yet. He is a man no longer young, who has spent his entire adult life as somebody's assistant. For 40 years, his title was simply this: the servant of Moses. He carried things. He waited outside the tent of meeting while Moses went in. He guarded the lower slopes of the mountain while Moses climbed into the cloud. When the light fell, it fell on someone else, and Joshua stood just outside its edge, faithful, quiet, and easy to overlook. Only at scattered moments did he step fully into the foreground. On the battlefield against the Amalekites, leading the fight while Moses prayed on the hill above him. In the mission of the 12 spies, when 10 men came back trembling and only 2, Joshua and his friend Caleb, dared to say, "The Lord is with us, do not be afraid." And later, when Moses publicly appointed him before the priest and all the congregation, laying hands on him in front of the nation he would one day lead. For that faith in the wilderness, he was promised the future. And then the future made him wait 40 years. So do not picture a fearless hero standing at the Jordan. Picture a man who has just buried his teacher and who must now stand exactly where that teacher stood, in front of everyone, with one thought circling his mind like a slow bird. "I am not Moses." The people know it. The enemies across the river know it. And he knows it best of all. And it is into that fear that God speaks the opening words of this book. Moses, my servant, is dead. What a strange way for God to begin. Joshua knew Moses was dead. The whole nation had wept for a month. Why would God open with the sentence that hurt the most? I believe the answer is tender, not harsh. Sometimes the kindest thing that can be said to a grieving heart is the honest thing. God does not pretend. He does not soften it. He names the loss out loud, the way a good friend does, so that Joshua does not have to carry it alone in silence. Moses, my servant, is dead. It is true. It is spoken. And now, and only now, can the next words come. Now therefore arise. Go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them. Arise. It is the word you say to someone who has been sitting in the ashes long enough. The morning was right. The morning was honored. But the story is not over, and the river is not the end of the map. And then God gives Joshua a promise so large it takes a moment to hear it properly. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. If Joshua's deepest fear had a name, the name was comparison. I am not him. And God's answer is not, you will be just as great as Moses. God's answer is better. The greatness was never in Moses. The greatness was in the one who walked beside him. And that one is not dead. That one does not change. The staff has been laid down, but the hand that made the staff mighty is resting now on a tired assistant's shoulder. Then come the words this book is famous for. God says them once, then again, then a third time, pressing the seal into the wax until the mark holds. Be strong and courageous. Only be strong and very courageous. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. 3 times in a single charge. And there is a quiet kindness inside that repetition. You do not usually need to tell a fearless man to stop being afraid. The repetition suggests that courage was something Joshua needed, not something he already had. And heaven did not scold him for needing it. Heaven simply stayed and repeated itself, patiently, the way you repeat a promise to a child at bedtime until their breathing slows. If you came to this night carrying something like Joshua's burden, hear this gently. Maybe someone who held your world together is gone, and everyone is looking at you now. Maybe you have been handed a role you never felt ready for. Maybe you lie awake, listening to your own river in the dark, thinking, I am not enough for what is coming. The first chapter of Joshua was written for that exact bed. It is God sitting down on the edge of it, saying the honest thing first, and then the strong thing. Yes, the loss is real. Now arise, and I will be with you wherever you go. One more small treasure before we set this stone down. The name Joshua in Hebrew is Yehoshua, and Yehoshua means the Lord is salvation, not Joshua is salvation. His own name was a nightly reminder that the rescue never depended on him. And centuries later, in a small town in Galilee, that same name would be given to another child, spoken in Aramaic as Yeshua, and carried into Greek and into English as the name Jesus. The name at the front of this fierce old book is the name at the center of the whole Bible. We will let that seed rest in the soil for now. It will bloom on its own before our night is over. The tent is quiet. The river murmurs in the distance. And the man who thought he was only an assistant has heard the voice that makes assistants into deliverers. The first stone is set. 11 remain, and the night is long enough for all of them. If your eyes are growing heavy already, let them close. The stones will wait for you, and so will he. Stone 2. The Scarlet Cord. Before an army crosses a river, it sends its eyes ahead. So Joshua sends 2 spies across the Jordan secretly with one instruction: go, view the land, especially Jericho. Especially Jericho, the first city, the locked gate of the whole country. Jericho sat in the river valley like a stone in a doorway, and if Israel could not pass Jericho, Israel could not pass at all. Now, Joshua knew something about spying. 40 years earlier, he had been a spy himself, one of 12. And that mission ended in disaster, not because the report was false, but because fear spread through the camp like fire through dry grass. So notice what the old man does this time. He sends 2, not 12. He sends them secretly, not publicly. He is not looking for a vote. He is looking for the truth. Some lessons cost 40 years, and Joshua had paid for this one in full. The 2 men cross the river at night. They slip through the gates of Jericho among the traders and travelers of the evening. And then they do the one thing nobody would expect from the heroes of a holy book. They go to the house of a prostitute. Her name was Rahab. And before we go further, let us clear the air about her, because for centuries readers have blushed at this part of the story and tried to explain it away. Some old translators softened her title. Perhaps she only kept an inn, they said. But the Hebrew word is not ambiguous, and the Bible itself never blushes. The New Testament keeps her title twice over, in the letter to the Hebrews and in the letter of James. Rahab the prostitute. Why does Scripture insist on remembering that? I believe it is because the Bible is not a museum of polished statues. It is a rescue record. And a rescue record has no reason to hide how far down the rope was lowered. Think about who this woman was in her own city. Her house was built into the wall itself, on the outer edge of everything. That is a detail from the text, and it is also a picture of her life. She lived on the margin of the margin. Scripture does not describe her days for us, but you know how a town treats a woman like that. Known by night, unseen by daylight. She had a family, a father and mother, brothers and sisters, so she was somebody's daughter, somebody's big sister. But in the eyes of Jericho, she was a category, not a person. Heaven saw her. The spies come to her house, likely because it was the one place strangers could enter without questions. But someone recognizes them anyway, and word runs straight to the king of Jericho. Soldiers are at her door within the hour. Bring out the men who came to you, they demand. And here, in the space of a single verse, Rahab makes the decision that will echo for 3,000 years. She has 2 Israelite strangers hidden under the stalks of flax drying on her roof. She has the king's soldiers standing at her door. Her whole life has taught her one rule: survive. Please the powerful. Do not stick your neck out for anyone, because no one has ever stuck out a neck for you. She looks at the soldiers, and she chooses the strangers. Yes, the men came to me, she says, but I did not know where they were from. They left at dusk, just before the gate closed. Chase them quickly, and you will catch them. The soldiers rush off toward the river fords, the gate shuts behind them, and a dangerous lie settles into the evening air. Then Rahab climbs the stairs to her roof, where 2 men lie hidden under the flax, hearts pounding. And what she says to them next is an astonishing speech. Listen to the theology of a woman speaking from outside Israel's covenant. I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen upon us. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Stop and weigh those words. The crossing of the Red Sea happened 40 years earlier, which means the story had been traveling through the region for 40 years. It came into Jericho with the caravans, a rumor of a slave nation walking through the sea on dry ground. Jericho had heard the same report. The king heard it. The soldiers heard it. And they all did the same thing with it. They built the walls higher. Rahab let the report become faith. That is the difference, and it is the whole difference. The letter to the Hebrews places her in its gallery of the faithful, alongside Abraham and Moses. By faith Rahab did not perish with those who were disobedient. And James holds her up beside Abraham himself as proof that real faith always moves the hands. Then comes her request, and you can almost hear her voice tremble. Swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house. Save my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them. Do you hear what she is not asking? Not gold, not position. The woman the city treated as disposable asks for one thing only, her family. She spends her one wish on them. The spies give her their word, and they give her a sign. Bind the scarlet cord in the window, they say. Gather your family inside the house. Everyone under this roof will live. A scarlet cord. A simple length of red thread hanging from a window in a doomed city wall. The spies escape down that very cord, out the window, down the outside of the wall, into the hills. And the moment they are gone, the text records it in one short line. She tied the scarlet cord in the window. Not the next morning, not when the army appeared on the horizon. That very hour. Her rescue was still weeks away, but her faith did not wait for the danger to become visible. From that night on, every sunrise touched a red thread in her window, a silent flag that said, "Someone in this city believes." Readers across the centuries have paused at the color of that cord. Scarlet, hanging as a sign of rescue on the eve of judgment. It is hard not to remember another night, back in Egypt, when the color red on a doorway meant that death would pass over a house. Scripture never draws the line between the two out loud, so I will hold it gently as a resonance rather than a decree. But the pattern is there for the heart that sees it. When judgment falls in the Bible, mercy hangs a marker, and the marker is red. Now, let me tell you where her thread runs, because it runs far beyond Jericho. She and her family were saved when the city fell. The text says she lived in Israel from that day forward. And when the Gospel of Matthew opens the New Testament with the family record of Jesus, it does something ancient family trees almost never did. It includes women, only a handful of them, each one deliberately chosen. And there, in the 5th verse of that record, joined to a man of Judah named Salmon, and to their son Boaz is her name. Rahab, Boaz, the kind-hearted farmer of the book of Ruth, famous for his mercy toward a foreign woman gleaning in his fields. It is tempting to wonder where Boaz learned to look at an outsider and see a person, perhaps at his own mother's table. Scripture does not say, but Matthew's record is unmistakable about the larger truth. The woman from the wall of Jericho stands in the ancestry of the Messiah. The name that meant shame in her own city is printed in the family line of the Savior of the world. So here is what this second stone says, and hold it close if any part of Rahab's story feels like yours. Maybe there is a chapter of your life you are sure disqualifies you, a title you carry, a past that people remember. Rahab's stone says otherwise. God reads the heart, not the label. He found faith in the last house anyone in Jericho would have checked, and he did not just spare that faith. He honored it, recorded it, and set it in the family line of his own son. Your past is a fact. It is not a verdict. The lamps are going out along the wall of Jericho. The soldiers have given up the chase by the river. And in one window, high on the outer wall, a scarlet cord stirs in the night wind, small and quiet and certain. The second stone stands beside the first. 10 are still waiting, down in the dark of the riverbed. If sleep is settling over you like flax straw on a rooftop, do not fight it. The river will still be there when we meet again. Stone 3. the river that stopped flowing. The spies come home in the dark, and their report is only one sentence long. Truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. 40 years earlier, 10 spies had brought back fear. These two bring back faith, and much of it they learned from a woman on a wall. Courage travels in strange directions sometimes. A prostitute in Jericho strengthened the army of God. Early in the morning, Joshua moves the whole nation from their camp to the edge of the Jordan River. And there they stop, and there they stay for 3 full days, looking at the water. I want you to see what they were looking at, because our maps have made us imagine it wrong. Most days of the year, the Jordan is a modest river, narrow enough in places that a strong man could throw a stone across it. But the text tells us exactly when this crossing happened, and the timing changes everything. It was the time of harvest, the early spring, when the snows of the far northern mountains were melting, and the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. So this was not a stream. This was a flood. A brown, swollen, hurrying flood, spilling out of its channel and into the thickets on either side, carrying branches and foam, loud enough to hear from the tents at night. No boats are mentioned anywhere in this story. No bridge existed. And on the far side, somewhere beyond the water, the walls of Jericho stood watching. An entire nation, with children and old ones and animals and everything they owned, standing in front of a river in flood. For 3 days, God let them look at it. I do not think those 3 days were a delay. I think they were a gift of a strange and severe kind. God wanted the problem measured honestly before he solved it. He let them hear the water at night. He let the impossibility soak all the way in. Because a rescue you have not fully needed is a rescue you will not fully remember. Maybe you know those 3 days. Maybe you are camped beside something right now that you have measured from every angle, and every measurement says the same thing. Too wide, too deep, too strong. If so, breathe slowly here. This stone was cut for you. On the 3rd day, the officers go through the camp with instructions, and the instructions are not what anyone expected. No ropes, no rafts. Instead, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the priests, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. Yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits. Do not come near it, in order that you may know the way you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. 2,000 cubits is more than half a mile. Keep that much space, God says, between yourselves and the ark. And he tells them why, so that you may know the way, so that everyone, from the front of that great crowd to the very back, could lift their eyes and see the ark gleaming far ahead and know where to walk. Held out in front, alone, with open ground around it, it could lead a whole people. And then that last phrase, spoken so gently you could almost miss it. For you have not passed this way before. That may be the truest sentence about your life, this book will say all night. You have not passed this way before. Every morning you wake into a day nobody has ever lived. This year of your life has no map, because no one has ever been you, here, now. God does not scold his people for not knowing the way. He walks out in front and makes himself visible and says, "Watch where I go." Then Joshua says to the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." Tomorrow. Sleep on that word the way Israel did. They went to bed beside a flood, having been promised a wonder they could not picture, and the last sound they heard was the water that was supposed to defeat them. Some nights, faith is nothing grander than going to sleep before the answer comes. Morning arrives. The priests lift the ark onto their shoulders. The camp forms behind them at its careful distance. And now comes the moment this chapter has been carrying toward, so let us slow all the way down for it. At the Red Sea, 40 years earlier, the water opened first. Moses stretched out his staff, the sea divided, and then the people walked in on dry ground. First the miracle, then the step. At the Jordan, God reverses the order. Listen to his instruction. When the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters shall be cut off. When their feet rest in the water, not before. The river will not stop at the shoreline. The river will stop at the touch of a foot that has already stepped in. Picture the priests then, men in heavy robes, carrying on wooden poles the holiest object in their world, walking down the muddy bank toward a flood in full spring anger. Every step, the roar gets louder. Every step, the water is still there. 10 paces away, still flooding. 5 paces, still flooding. 1 pace, still flooding. Then a sandal goes down into the cold edge of the current. And far upstream, at a town called Adam, near Zarethan, the waters rise up in a heap. The river stands. The flood piles upon itself at a great distance, held by nothing anyone can see, and the water flowing past the priests thins and slows and drains away toward the salt sea, until the stones of the riverbed are shining wet in the sun, and then simply dry. The text is careful with its geography here. Adam was miles upstream, out of sight, which means the priests standing in the riverbed could not even see the wall of water that was sparing them. They only saw the result: dry ground and a silence where the roar had been. Some of the things God does for us happen upstream, out of sight, and all we ever see is the strange, sudden calm. The priests carry the ark to the middle of the riverbed and stand still, and the nation crosses. Hour after hour, families with bundles on their heads, children running on stones that had lain hidden beneath the flood, old men and women who had walked out of Egypt as children, now walking into the promise at last, dry ground under their feet the whole way. And the priests just stand there, in the middle, holding the ark while the river waits. Faith gets its feet wet first. That is the sentence this stone was quarried for. The water did not stop so that they would step in. They stepped in, and the water stopped. And when God has clearly called his people forward, the Jordan teaches what obedience looks like. It does not wait for every difficulty to disappear before it moves. Not always instantly, not always visibly, but in this story, and in so many stories since, the way opened after the step, not before it. The last family reaches the far bank as the light turns gold. Promised soil was beneath the feet of the nation at last. Behind them, the ark still rests in the empty riverbed, and the flood still waits in its heap, patient as a held breath, somewhere upstream in the distance. 2 stones stood on the bank when this chapter began. Now there are 3. Listen. The evening wind is moving over the water meadows. The far side of every river is quiet like this. Rest here a while. Stone 4. The stones themselves. The nation is across. But before the river is allowed to flow again, God stops everything for one more task. The task is not military, and it is not urgent, and that is exactly why it matters. He tells Joshua, "Take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man, and command them, take 12 stones, from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight." Think about how strange this is. The most dangerous hour of the crossing is right now. The whole nation is standing on the enemy's side of the water. Jericho is close enough to see. Every military instinct says move, fortify, prepare. And instead, God sends 12 men wading back into an empty riverbed to pick up rocks. Because God knows something about his people and about you and me that we keep forgetting about ourselves. He knows that we forget. Not because we are wicked, because we are tired. Memory is the first thing exhaustion takes. The miracle that makes your knees weak on Tuesday becomes a footnote by Friday and a faded photograph by next year. The Israelites standing on that bank had just watched a flood stand up and wait for them. They were certain, in that hour, that they would never forget it as long as they lived. And God, who had known them for a long time, looked at their certainty with the patience of a father, and said, "Take 12 stones anyway." So 12 men, one from every tribe, walk back down into the riverbed. I love that detail, one from every tribe. Every family line in the nation had to put its own shoulder under the remembering. No tribe would be able to say, later, that the miracle belonged to someone else's grandfather. Each man hoists onto his shoulder a stone from the place where the priests stood, still dark and wet from the flood, and carries it up the bank. And then the priests come up out of the riverbed at last, carrying the ark. And the text says that as soon as the soles of their feet were lifted up onto dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks, as before. As before, the flood comes home. The roar returns. Within minutes, the Jordan looks exactly the way it looked yesterday, hurrying and brown and impossible, as if nothing had ever happened. That is how it is with the partings in our lives. The sea closes, the river resumes, the ordinary rushes back in, and all that remains of the miracle is what someone thought to carry out of it. Israel carried 12 stones. They camp that night at a place called Gilgal, on the east border of Jericho, and there Joshua sets the 12 stones up together. Not scattered, not buried. Standing, Israel has not built a single house yet. She has not planted one seed or raised one wall. The first thing the people of God build in their new country is a memory. And then Joshua tells them why. When your children ask their fathers in times to come, "What do these stones mean?" then you shall let your children know, Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea. So that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. When your children ask, do you hear the assumption buried in that? God is counting on the curiosity of children. He builds his memorial out of ordinary river rock, no inscription, no carving, nothing explained, precisely so that it will not explain itself. A monument with a plaque gets read once and forgotten. A pile of stones with no plaque gets asked about forever. Every generation, some child walking past Gilgal would tug a sleeve and say, "Why are those there?" And a father or a grandmother would stop and look at the stones, and the story would come up out of memory, like water out of a well. I was there. Or my mother was there. The river was in flood. The priests stepped in, and the water stood up and waited for us. The stones did not tell the story. The stones made sure the story kept being told. You can feel the echo of Gilgal all through the Bible. When Samuel raises a stone and names it Ebenezer, saying, "Thus far the Lord has helped us," that is Gilgal's grammar. When the psalmist commands his own soul, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits," that is a man stacking stones inside his own chest. And on the last night of his life, when Jesus lifts bread and says, "Do this in remembrance of me," he leaves his people a table they would have to return to, again and again. A memorial built to make children and grandmothers ask, "What does this mean?" Now let me bring this stone to your bedside, because this is the chapter of our night that is really about you. You have a riverbed too. Somewhere back down the years of your life, there are places where the water should have swept you away and did not. The illness that turned, the provision that arrived the week the money ran out, the person who found you in the season you were sinking, the prayer you almost did not pray, answered in a way you still cannot explain. At the time, you were certain you would never forget. And then the river resumed. The ordinary rushed back in, with its bills and its noise and its long grey Tuesdays, and the memory sank under the current. The stones are still down there. This chapter exists to send you wading back for one. So do this with me now, slowly, as the camp at Gilgal settles around its first fires in the Promised Land. Let your mind drift back along your own Jordan. Do not hunt anxiously. Just drift the way you drift before sleep anyway. And when you come to one of those places, one crossing, one rescue, one kindness that carried you, pick it up. Feel the weight of it, dark and wet and real. You do not have to build the whole monument tonight. Gilgal started with one man, one shoulder, one stone. Name it silently, in the dark. That is all. Naming it is carrying it up the bank. Because remembering is not living in the past. Remembering is packing supplies for the future. The Israelites would face walls and failures and giants in the years ahead. And on the hard days, the road home to courage always ran past Gilgal. The stones never made the enemies smaller. The stones made the memory of God bigger, and that turned out to be the same thing. The fires are burning low in the first camp in Canaan. 12 stones stand together in the starlight, still drying, the river loud again in the distance behind them. Somewhere among the tents, it has probably already happened for the first time. A child, half asleep on a father's shoulder, pointing. What are those? And a tired, glad voice beginning. We crossed on dry ground. 4 stones stand in our own small monument now. The pile is starting to look like remembering. Sleep, if sleep is near. The stone you carried up from your own history will still be standing in the morning. Stone 5. The night before Jericho. If you were writing the book of Joshua as a movie, you know what would come next. The army crosses the river, the drums begin, and the camera rises over the walls of Jericho for the battle. That is precisely what does not happen. Instead, the Bible gives us an entire chapter in which not one sword is drawn. Israel camps at Gilgal, in full view of the enemy, and does 3 quiet things that no general on earth would have ordered. And hidden inside those 3 quiet things is the single truth this stone carries. Before God gives his people a victory, he gives them an identity. Here is the first quiet thing, and I will say it plainly, the way the text does. At Gilgal, God commands that all the men of Israel be circumcised. If that seems like a strange detail for a bedtime story, stay with me, because the meaning underneath it is beautiful. Circumcision was the physical sign of the covenant, the mark God gave to Abraham centuries before, the sign in the body that said, "This family belongs to the promise." Every son of Israel was supposed to carry it from 8 days old. But the text tells us something sad. The generation born during the 40 years in the wilderness had never received the sign. All those wandering years, the covenant mark had simply lapsed. An entire generation grew up in the desert unmarked, sons of the promise with no sign of the promise on them. As if the nation itself had quietly concluded, perhaps we are not really that family anymore. And notice when God corrects this, not in the safety of the wilderness. Here, now, on the wrong side of the walls, with Jericho watching in the distance. Militarily, it looks like madness. The text is honest that the men needed days to heal. The whole army was, for a little while, vulnerable in enemy country. No attack came. The same terror that Rahab described was still lying on the city like a fog. God had already disarmed the enemy with a rumor, and so his people could afford to do the slow, tender work of becoming themselves again. And when it was done, God spoke a lovely sentence over the camp. "This day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." Readers have long weighed exactly what that reproach was, the shame of the slave years, or the lapsed sign, or the scorn of the nations. What the text says plainly is that God rolled it away, like a stone from a doorway. That is what the name Gilgal means, a rolling. They named the campsite after that, rolling away. The second quiet thing follows like evening follows afternoon. While they healed, the calendar came around to the 14th day of the first month. And on that evening, on the plains of Jericho, Israel kept the Passover. Feel the weight of the timing. Passover was the meal of the Exodus, the lamb and the bitter herbs, the memory of the night when death passed over the blood-marked doors of Egypt. The first Passover had been eaten by their parents, standing, sandals on, staffs in hand, slaves about to run. This one is the first Passover ever eaten in the Promised Land itself. Free people, sitting down, with the ashes of shame still cooling at the edge of the camp. Same meal, different table. And then, the very next day, the third quiet thing happens, and this one nobody would ever invent. It is too strange and too true. The manna stopped. For 40 years, every morning except the Sabbath, bread had fallen out of heaven with the dew. No one in that camp under 40 had ever eaten a breakfast that God did not directly, visibly provide. Manna was the taste of their entire childhood. And the day after they ate the produce of the land, the roasted grain, and the unleavened cakes of Canaan, the text says the manna ceased. They looked out at the morning ground, and for the first time in their lives, it was just ground. Let us sit inside that morning for a moment, because some of you are living in it. There are seasons when God carries us with manna, direct, unmistakable, morning by morning help, because we are in a wilderness and we would not survive without it. And there are seasons when the manna quietly stops, not because God has left, but because the season has changed. The land itself is now the gift, the harvest, the work of your own healed hands, the ordinary bread of an ordinary field. All of it still comes from him, just through longer roads. Some graces end because they have succeeded. If a form of help that once carried you has faded, before you grieve it as abandonment, ask the Gilgal question. Has the manna stopped because God is gone, or because the land has finally come? They ate the food of Canaan, and heaven let them, gladly, like a mother watching a child feed itself for the first time. So there is Israel, marked with the covenant, fed with the Passover, weaned onto the land, identity restored, top to bottom. And only now does the chapter turn toward Jericho and give us one of the strangest encounters in the Old Testament. It happens when Joshua is by Jericho, alone it seems, perhaps walking the ground at dusk, an old commander measuring an impossible problem. He lifts up his eyes and looks, and behold, a man is standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. A stranger, armed, between him and the enemy city. Joshua does the direct thing he always does. He walks straight up to the figure and asks the question every soldier asks. Are you for us or for our adversaries? And the answer comes back like nothing Joshua expected. The figure says, no. Just that first. No. And then, I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. Do you hear what that no is doing? Joshua offered him 2 boxes, our side or their side, and the visitor declined both. He did not come to take sides. He came to take charge. The armies he commands are not camped at Gilgal. The question is not whether God is on Joshua's side. The question, suddenly, is whether Joshua is on his. And Joshua understands faster than we usually do. He falls on his face to the earth and worships, and asks, what does my Lord say to his servant? The general of Israel, face down in the dirt, resigning his command to a higher one. And the visitor answers with words spoken once before, at a burning bush, to a shepherd named Moses. Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. That is where the chapter ends. No battle plan yet, no further speech. Just a man no longer young, barefoot in the dusk outside Jericho, no holy ground. Who was this commander? Here is the honesty this channel owes you. Readers have pondered that question for over 2,000 years. Some, noting that he receives worship and speaks with the voice of the burning bush, have seen here a visible appearance of the Lord himself, and many Christian readers have gone further and wondered if this figure is the Son of God. Stepping into the story, he would one day enter fully. Others hold that he is the chief of the angelic hosts, a created messenger clothed in delegated glory. The text does not close the question. and so I will not close it for you. But notice what readers on all sides agree on. Whoever stood outside Jericho that evening, the battle already belonged to him. Jericho was never going to be defeated by Israel. It was going to be handed to Israel. And that changes how you sleep the night before your own walls. Because you likely have a Jericho too, something walled and shut that you have circled in your mind 100 times, measuring it the way Joshua measured those stones in the dusk. The lesson of the fifth stone is that the night before the walls is not for strategy. It is for sandals, for remembering whose you are before you worry about what you face. Covenant first, table first, worship first. The people of God spent the eve of their hardest battle not sharpening swords, but healing and eating and taking their shoes off. The camp at Gilgal is dark now. The Passover fires have burned down to red. Out past the edge of the tents, the walls of Jericho stand against the stars, huge and silent. And, somewhere between the camp and the city, the ground is still holy, where an old man stood barefoot and gave his war away. The fifth stone is set. 7 remain. Lay your own strategies down beside your shoes. The watch belongs to the commander now, and it has been kept since long before these walls were built. Stone 6. 7 days of silence. Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. That is how the famous chapter begins, and feel the stillness in that sentence. A city holding its breath. The gates barred, the markets empty, the watchmen on the walls looking down at the strange nation camped in the distance. Jericho was among the oldest cities on earth, and her walls were her whole argument. Whatever came, the walls had always answered it. And the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and mighty men of valor." Have given, past tense, spoken before a single step is taken. In the grammar of heaven, the city has already fallen. All that remains is for the fall to happen on earth. And then God explains how. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus shall you do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat. That is the entire battle plan. Walk in circles. Carry the ark. Blow trumpets made from ram's horns, the kind used for worship, not for war. And on the 7th day, shout. There is not one weapon in the instructions, not one ladder, one ram, one tactic. And then Joshua adds one order of his own to the people, and it is the order this chapter is named for. You shall not shout or make your voice heard, neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. Then you shall shout. Total silence. For 6 days, the army of Israel will march around a fortified city without saying a single word. Think about how hard that is. Not the marching, the silence. Because what do people do when they are afraid? They talk. They fill the air with opinions and complaints and predictions because noise feels like control. 40 years earlier, this nation had talked itself out of the promised land. 10 spies gave a frightened report. The people repeated it from campfire to campfire, and by morning the fear had become a fact. So this time, God's general takes away the words. See the first morning of it. The gates of Jericho barred, the watchmen leaning over the parapet, ready for arrows, ready for siege engines, ready for everything except what comes. The armed men of Israel walk out of Gilgal in formation. Behind them, 7 priests with 7 curling ram's horns, sounding long, uneven notes. Behind the priests, the ark, gold catching the early sun. Behind the ark, the rear guard, no war cries, no chanting, just the shuffle of thousands of feet on dry ground and the low crying of the horns. They walk the full circuit of the city, and then, without any signal the watchers can detect, they turn and go back to camp and are quiet. Now, put yourself on top of the wall, among the men of Jericho. The first day, you laugh. Nervously, but you laugh. The second day, the laughing is thinner. The third day, the theories begin. What are they doing? Is it a ritual? A curse? The fifth day, you notice your hands are not steady on your spear. The sixth day, you do not say anything at all. You just stand at the parapet in the early light and watch the column come around again and go away again, and the horns fade off toward the camp, and the morning is very quiet after they have gone. Inside one house on that wall, the waiting had another shape. Rahab, with her father and mother and brothers and sisters gathered under her roof, day after day, the scarlet cord hanging in the window. Picture her family asking her, morning after morning, "Are you certain?" And her answer having to be the same each time. "Stay inside. I gave them my word, and they gave me theirs." Meanwhile, in the camp, 6 evenings in a row, the army comes home with nothing to show. Nothing has visibly changed. The walls are exactly as tall as they were. And here is where this stone touches your life. Obedience often looks like 6 days of nothing. You pray, you forgive, you keep the commitment, you make the slow circle again, and the wall does not move. And the only report you can write is, "I did what he said, and nothing happened." Keep walking. The silent laps were not failing. They were counting. Then comes the 7th day. They rise at dawn, at the first grey light, because today the circuit is not 1 lap, but 7. Around and around the city, hour after hour, the horns crying, the feet drumming softly, the sun climbing. The 7th lap ends. The column halts. For one moment, everything seems to stop. The marchers, the watchers, the morning itself. And the priests set the horns to their lips and blow one long, unbroken, rising blast. And Joshua, who has kept silence with his people for 7 days, lifts his voice at last. "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. The text is that simple. It spends no time on spectacle. The rampart that had answered every enemy for longer than anyone in the city could remember fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him. No gate needed. Where there had been a wall, there was a way. The letter to the Hebrews looks back at this morning and gives the verdict plainly. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. Of the city's end I will say what must be said, plainly and without lingering. Jericho fell under the ban, devoted to God, and the city was burned, and the judgment long warned of came in full. It is a heavy thing. 2 stones from now we will sit down with that heaviness honestly and ask the hard questions with the lights on. Tonight is not for pretending the fire was not real. Tonight is for seeing what the fire could not touch. Because, before the burning, Joshua spoke to the 2 spies. "Go into the prostitute's house and bring out from there the woman and all who belong to her, as you swore to her." And the young men went and brought out Rahab and her father and mother and brothers, and all who belonged to her, every soul that had waited under the scarlet cord, and set them safely outside the camp of Israel. Hold that picture. A whole city of walls came down, and the thing left standing was a promise. And the text adds, in a line that always moves me, and she has lived in Israel to this day. The woman from the wall got a home and a family and a place in the ancestry of the Messiah. When God shakes a city, he knows exactly where his people are. The 7th day is over. The horns are quiet. Let the noise of it drain away now, the way sound drains out of a valley at dusk. Far behind the army, at Gilgal, 12 river stones stand in the evening light, and tonight they have a story worthy of them. 6 stones stand in our monument. 6 still wait. We are halfway through the night, and the loudest chapter is behind us. Breathe out, slowly. The city of every fear is silent now. And the last sound of this chapter is not a wall falling. It is a family, walking out safe, under a red thread, into the rest of their lives. Stone 7, the heaviest stone. Every honest story has a chapter like this one. The book of Joshua has been climbing from victory to victory, the river, the walls, the rescue under the scarlet cord. And now, without warning, the story falls down a flight of stairs. The text opens with a single quiet sentence that changes the weather of the whole book. But the people of Israel broke faith in regard to the devoted things. For Achan, the son of Carmi, of the tribe of Judah, took some of the devoted things. And the anger of the Lord burned against the people of Israel. Nobody in the camp knows this yet. That is the ache of the sentence. The reader knows, and heaven knows, and one man, lying in his tent, knows. Everyone else wakes up the next morning believing everything is fine. Joshua sends spies to the next objective, a small town in the hills called Ai. The spies come back relaxed. Do not make the whole people toil up there, they say. Ai is small. 2,000 or 3,000 men will do it. And can you hear what has crept into the camp between the lines? Jericho fell without a sword drawn, and somewhere in the afterglow, the people began to credit the wrong army. Nobody in the account stops to seek the Lord about Ai. The nation that spent 7 days in obedient silence now spends about 1 verse on planning. So 3,000 men march up the ravines toward Ai. And Ai comes out against them, and Israel breaks and runs. 36 men do not come home. The text says, the hearts of the people melted and became as water, and notice the bitter echo. That is the phrase Rahab used about the Canaanites. In one morning, the fear has changed sides. And Joshua, the man of courage, comes apart. He tears his clothes and falls on his face before the ark until evening, dust on his grey head, and listen to his prayer, because it is not a polished prayer. Alas, O Lord God, why have you brought this people over the Jordan at all, to give us into the hands of the Amorites, to destroy us? Would that we had been content to dwell beyond the Jordan. He sounds, for a moment, exactly like the wilderness generation he outlived. Fear speaks in the old accent, and God's answer is bracing, the way a father's voice sharpens when the moment is truly serious. Get up. Why have you fallen on your face? Israel has sinned. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen and lied. That is why the people of Israel cannot stand before their enemies. The defeat at Ai was not a military problem. It was a buried problem. And buried problems do not stay buried. They leak. The next morning, the whole nation is gathered, and a solemn search begins, tribe by tribe, clan by clan, household by household, until one man stands alone before Joshua, Achan, of the tribe of Judah. And here Joshua says something that tells you what kind of man he is. He does not rage. He says, my son, give glory to the Lord God of Israel and give praise to him. And tell me now what you have done. Do not hide it from me. My son, even now, the old commander speaks like a father. And Achan confesses, truly I have sinned, he says. When I saw among the spoil a beautiful cloak from Shinar, and 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold, then I coveted them and took them. And behold, they are hidden in the earth inside my tent. I saw, I coveted, I took, I hid. The pattern is as old as Eden. Seeing, desiring, taking, and then the hiding, once the thing is done. And for what? A beautiful coat he could never wear in public. Silver and gold he could never spend. Treasure that was useless the moment he owned it, because owning it had to be a secret. Somewhere under the floor of a tent in the camp of Israel, a fortune lay in the dark, and a man lay down on top of it every night and slept badly. What follows is the hardest scene in the book, and I will not soften it. Achan was taken to a valley, and there judgment fell, and he did not see another morning. They raised over him a great heap of stones, and the valley was named Achor, which means trouble. And notice what his confession did, and what it did not do. It ended the hiding. The truth came up out of the floor of the tent and into the light, and the lie was finally over. But it did not erase the consequences. 36 men were already gone. The judgment still came. Scripture is too honest to pretend that confession always makes the damage disappear. Some of you know that from your own story. The confession was real, and the wreckage was still real too. This chapter refuses to lie to you about that. So where is the mercy in the valley of Achor? Not in the valley itself. The mercy comes from further down the road, and the Bible takes its time getting there. Centuries later, the prophet Hosea, speaking God's promise to unfaithful Israel, wrote a sentence that stops the heart. I will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. The valley of trouble, God says, I will turn into a doorway. And Christian readers, hearing that promise, have long thought of another hill of judgment. Outside another city, where a beloved son of the tribe of Judah was lifted up, not for treasure he had buried, but for ours. The mercy Achan never saw in his valley, the gospel holds out in full. That is not a conclusion the valley of Achor could reach on its own. It is what the rest of the Bible does with the valley. And now I owe you something larger. All night we have walked past the fires of this book, at Jericho, and here in this valley, and I promised we would sit down with the hard question honestly. So let us do that, gently, with the lights on. The question is real, and if you have felt it, you are not faithless for feeling it. These chapters contain commands of total judgment, the ban on Jericho, the destruction of whole cities. Entire populations stand under those words, including those who never lifted a weapon, and that is the part that presses hardest on the modern reader, and it should press. I will not pretend a bedtime story can resolve it. Christians who trust these same scriptures have differed, honestly and for centuries, over how the war language of these campaigns should be understood. Some read it as plain history, a unique judgment at a unique moment, never repeatable, prepared for by centuries of patience, as God told Abraham that the sin of the land was not yet complete. Some note that ancient war accounts spoke in sweeping victory language that their first hearers knew how to hear. Others read these chapters looking forward, as a fierce early shadow of a final judgment that belongs to God alone and never to human armies. Whatever reading one takes, the book itself does not present mercy's door as closed. Rahab believed and was folded into the family. The Gibeonites, whom we will meet soon, sought peace and were spared. The judgment of this book fell within reach of mercy, and the mercy is what lasted. Hold the question with both hands if you need to. This book is old enough to carry your wrestling. Many careful souls have carried it before you, and carried it all the way to mourning. The story itself turns immediately toward grace. The very next words after the valley are these. And the Lord said to Joshua, Do not fear, and do not be dismayed. Arise, go up to Ai. See, I have given into your hand the king of Ai. The same words as before Jericho. The failure did not cancel the promise. Israel returns to Ai, this time under God's direct command, and the town that defeated them falls. And God adds one detail I find almost tender. This time, he says, Its spoil and its livestock you shall take as plunder for yourselves. Do you see it? Had Achan waited, he would have lived to see God freely permit at Ai what had been forbidden at Jericho. Sin snatches at what patience was already carrying toward us. The chapter closes on a mountain called Ebal, where Joshua builds an altar and writes the law on stones, and all Israel stands in two great companies on facing slopes, reading the blessings and the warnings aloud across the valley, the whole nation, with the women and the little ones, and the sojourners among them. After the valley of trouble, a valley of covenant. The people who fell are the people who stand and begin again. The seventh stone is set. It is the heaviest one. Let it rest. And if something is buried under the floor of your own tent tonight, hear the one sure kindness this chapter offers. The hiding can end. Bring it into the light, to God, and where it is needed, to the people it touched. The consequences are not yours to control. The mercy is not yours to earn. But the lie, at least, can be over by morning. 5 stones remain. The night grows gentler from here, I promise. Stone 8. The covenant with the deceivers. News travels fast in a frightened land. The kings of Canaan hear what happened at Jericho and they do what frightened kings have always done. They form an alliance. From the hill country to the coast, old rivals shake hands over a common enemy. But one city hears the same news and reaches a different conclusion. The city is called Gibeon, a large town in the hills, only a few miles from Israel's camp. And the Gibeonites look at the ruins behind Israel, and they decide that this is not a war anyone wins. This is a flood you either escape or drown in. So they do not sharpen swords. They gather costumes. What follows is a scene the Bible tells with an almost theatrical delight in the details. The Gibeonites took worn-out sacks for their donkeys, and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended. They put worn-out, patched sandals on their feet and worn-out clothes on their backs. And all their provision of bread was dry and crumbly. Do you see what they are building? A costume of distance. Every detail is designed to say one thing. We have traveled a very long way. Because the Gibeonites have somehow learned the terms of Israel's warfare, the cities of the land itself were under the ban. But the law of Moses allowed peace treaties with cities that were very far off. So if Gibeon can convince Israel that it lies beyond the horizon, Gibeon can live. They walk the few short miles to the camp at Gilgal, and they perform their play. We have come from a distant country, they say. So now make a covenant with us, and listen to the script they have prepared. Your servants have come because of the name of the Lord your God, for we have heard a report of him, and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites beyond the Jordan. Notice what they mention, and what they do not. Egypt, 40 years old. The kings beyond the Jordan, years old. They never mention Jericho. They never mention Ai. A traveler truly from a far country would know only the old news, so they quote only the old news. These men have thought of everything. They even hold up the bread. This bread was warm when we took it from our houses, they say, and now, behold, it is dry and crumbly. Every crack in the leather is a line in the performance. And now comes the verse on which the chapter turns. So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord. They examined the evidence. They handled the bread, inspected the sandals, weighed the story. They did everything except the one thing that costs nothing and would have saved everything. They did not ask. And let us be gentle with Israel here, because the mistake is so recognizably ours. It is precisely when the evidence looks sufficient that prayer feels unnecessary. Nobody forgets to ask God about the impossible things. We forget to ask him about the obvious things. The bread was so convincingly stale. The case practically decided itself. So Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. 3 days later, the costume falls off. Israel discovers that these far country travelers live over the next range of hills. The whole camp has been played, and the congregation murmured against the leaders, and you can hear the fury in it. We were deceived. The oath was obtained by fraud. Surely a promise extracted by lies is no promise at all. Tear it up. Every instinct of fairness agrees. And this is where the book of Joshua does something quietly magnificent. The leaders answer, "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we will do to them, let them live, lest wrath be upon us, because of the oath that we swore to them." Read that again slowly. They do not say, "The Gibeonites deserve our protection." They plainly do not. The leaders say something deeper. "We swore by the name of the Lord." The promise, once his name was on it, stopped being about the Gibeonites at all. It became about God. Breaking it would announce to every nation in Canaan that the name of the Lord is a seal that peels off when keeping it becomes expensive. And so Israel keeps a covenant she was tricked into signing. The Gibeonites live. Joshua assigns them to serve at the altar, cutting wood and drawing water for the house of God. It remained a sentence of service, imposed because of their lie. But even within that sentence, they were placed near the worship of the living God, and we will see in a moment what that nearness became. Centuries later, one of the Psalms of David would ask, "O Lord, who shall dwell on your holy hill?" And among the answers comes a line that could have been written about this chapter. "He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. The person who keeps the promise even after the promise turns painful. That," says the psalm, "is the person who lives near God, not the person who never gets deceived, the person who stays true anyway." I wonder if that lands somewhere in your life. Many of us carry at least one commitment that turned out different from the brochure. A marriage that grew harder than the wedding day imagined. A friendship that took more than it gave. A duty inherited, a care for someone that has lasted years longer than anyone predicted. And one clear word belongs here before anything else is said. Faithfulness does not require remaining exposed to abuse or violence. And seeking safety is not a betrayal of faith. But in the ordinary covenants that have become costly rather than destructive, the tired ones, the unglamorous ones, this old chapter offers its quiet counsel. There is a kind of soul that keeps its word to its own hurt, and heaven leans close to that kind of soul. Anyone can keep a bargain that keeps paying. The children of God keep the ones that cost. And now, let me tell you what became of the Gibeonites, because their story does not end as a cautionary tale. They were placed at the altar, woodcutters and water carriers for the house of the Lord. Think about where that put them. Every morning, for generations, the men of Gibeon woke and went to work at the place where the living God met his people. The nations of Canaan perished in their walled cities, and these deceivers, spared by an oath, spent their days within sound of the priest's blessing. And the trail runs on through Scripture, faint but real. Generations later, the tabernacle stood for a time at Gibeon, and it was there, of all places, that God appeared to young King Solomon at night and said, "Ask what I shall give you," and Solomon asked for wisdom. And generations later still, Scripture remembers men from Gibeon among those who helped rebuild Jerusalem's wall in the days of Nehemiah. That is what God did with a promise Israel regretted. And here is the deepest secret of the eighth stone. Our God keeps his oaths, even to people whose story with him began badly. Which, if we are honest in the dark, describes us all. None of us came to him with our sacks honestly labeled. We arrived managing appearances, presenting our stories with the best bread on top. And he knew. He always knew. You are not held by the perfection of your record. You are held by the faithfulness of the God who knows the whole truth and still calls sinners to come. The camp is settling again. Somewhere among the tents, the newest members of the community are bedding down too. Foreigners with mended sandals, spared men, lying awake in a camp they never expected to sleep in, among a people whose God does not loosen an oath when keeping it becomes costly. 8 stones now, 4 to go. Sleep inside, a kept promise, not one you made, one that was made to you. Stone 9. The day the sun stood still. kept promises have consequences. That is where this chapter begins. Word spreads through the hill country that Gibeon has made peace with Israel. And in Jerusalem, a king hears the news and feels the ground shift under his throne. His name is Adoni-Zedek, and he understands the map. Gibeon sits on the high ridge road, the spine of the country. With Gibeon gone over to Israel, the land is nearly cut in two. So he sends messengers to 4 other kings of the south, and his message is worth hearing carefully. "Come up to me and help me," he says, "and let us strike Gibeon. Not, let us strike Israel." The 5 kings are not ready to face the God of Jericho directly. They will do the older, easier thing. They will punish the ones who made peace with him. 5 armies converge on Gibeon and surround it. And the men of Gibeon send a desperate message down to the camp at Gilgal. "Do not relax your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us." Pause here, at the fork in this road, because everything in the 9th stone depends on what Joshua chooses next. Every practical voice in the camp had an easy case to make. Let it happen. These are the deceivers. The treaty promised to let them live, not to bleed for them. 5 armies will solve an embarrassing problem overnight, and no Israelite has to lift a sword. And Joshua hears the plea of the liars of Gibeon, and he musters the army and marches all night up from the Jordan Valley to save them. All night. The climb from Gilgal to Gibeon rises some 3,000 feet over rough country. Joshua takes his men up it in darkness, hour after hour, so that they come over the ridge at dawn, before the coalition expects them. This is what a kept promise looks like when it gets expensive. It looks like an old man marching uphill all night for people who lied to him. And somewhere on that dark climb, God speaks the words that have opened every great chapter of Joshua's life. "Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands." Dawn breaks over Gibeon, and Israel falls on the 5 armies with the daylight, and the text says the Lord threw them into a panic. The coalition breaks and pours down the western pass. And then the sky itself joins the day. As the armies flee down the descent of Beth Horon, clouds gather, and the Lord throws down great hailstones upon them, so many and so heavy that the text records a fact almost too strange to invent. More of the enemy died from the hail than from the swords of Israel. And now we come to the moment. Joshua stands watching the routed armies streaming west and south, scattering toward their walled cities. And he knows what every commander of that age knew. Nightfall is the friend of a fleeing army. Let the dark come, and the 5 kings regather behind their walls. Everything hangs on the hours of light remaining. And Joshua looks up, in front of the whole army, and speaks, not to his men, but to the sky. "Sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon." No prayer like it had been prayed before. Moses lifted his staff over the sea, but even Moses never gave orders to the sun. And the text answers with wonder in its own voice. "And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies." The sun stopped in the midst of heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. And then the verdict, written with awe. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. Now, what happened in the sky that day? Here is the honesty we have kept all night. The text clearly presents the day as an extraordinary act of God. What it does not explain is the physical manner in which that act occurred. And so faithful readers have understood it in more than one way. The oldest and most widespread reading takes the words at their full height. A miracle of the heavens. The day genuinely lengthened, held by the hand that set the sun burning in the first place. Many careful readers also note that Joshua's words are preserved in an old collection called the Book of Jashar, and that Hebrew victory poetry paints with bold strokes the way we still say the sun smiled on us. On this reading, the poem celebrates a real and mighty act of God in the colors of song. and a smaller number of interpreters have suggested something in the weather itself, the storm that brought the hail, also veiling the sun. This has always been a minority view, and the suggestion stays a suggestion. The text does not tell us the mechanism, and so I will not pretend to. But notice what every one of these readings holds in common, because it is the miracle underneath the miracle. Whatever the sky did that day, it did it because a man asked. The narrator does not marvel that the sun obeyed. Sons obey their maker as a matter of course. He marvels at this. The Lord heeded the voice of a man, and do not miss who the prayer was for. The longest day in the Bible was spent rescuing Gibeonites. This mighty answer to prayer was poured out in defense of people whose place within Israel's story began with a lie and a costume. When you wonder whether your history disqualifies your prayers, remember whose city the sun stood over. The rest of the day belongs to the victory, and the text tells it as a long exhale. The 5 kings are found hiding in a cave at Makkedah, and the old book records their end in the manner of its age, and I will let it keep those details. The men who came to crush a city of peace did not outlive the day they chose to do it. What I want you to hear instead is what Joshua says to his captains at that cave. Do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and courageous. For thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight. The words God spoke over Joshua at the Jordan, Joshua now speaks over his men. That is how courage works. It is received, and then it is handed on. The chapter closes with the southern campaign, city by city, told in the clipped voice of a war record, and then one final sentence draws a line under it all. And Joshua and all Israel with him return to the camp at Gilgal, back to the 12 stones, back to the place of beginnings. After the longest day, the old commander leads his army home past the monument of the river crossing, and I like to think the men fell quiet as they passed it. So here is what the 9th stone says, as the long day finally reaches its evening. Bold prayers do not intimidate God, and small prayers do not escape his notice. The Lord heeded the voice of a man, and the book of James adds that the prayer of a righteous person has great power. You will not need the sun halted tomorrow, but you may need strength held steady for 1 more hour, or patience stretched past its natural sunset, or light kept burning over some valley of your own until the work is finished. Ask. He is listening at every volume. 9 stones stand now in the dark. Let the sun of your own long day go down at last. It has waited, perhaps longer than it should have, on worries the night can hold without you. The sky over your roof is keeping its ancient watch. Sleep like a soldier after the march home. Past the stones. Into the camp. The fires are lit. Stone 10. The Old Man and the Mountain. After the 9th stone, the book of Joshua changes its voice. The trumpets fade, the campaigns are summarized, and for many chapters, the book becomes something unexpected. A land registry. Border lines and town lists, tribe by tribe, names of brooks and ridges and villages, page after page. Most readers close the book right there, and I understand why. So, let me be honest about what we are doing. We are going to walk gently past those chapters, the way you walk past shelves of old deeds in a records office. But do not despise them as you pass. To the families who first heard this book, those lists were not boring. Every name was somebody's inheritance. Every boundary line was a promise with coordinates. The wilderness generation owned nothing but tents and hope, and now their children could stand on a hill and say, from that stream to that ridge, this is ours, because he said so. The driest chapters of Joshua are actually its receipts. But buried in the middle of the registry, like a live coal in grey ash, there is one scene. Tonight we dig it out and warm ourselves at it. It happens at Gilgal, while the land is being assigned. The people of Judah come forward, and out of their ranks steps a man the book has been quietly saving. He is 85 years old. His beard is white, his face is cut deep with sun and years, and he walks up to Joshua, not as a stranger, but as the oldest friend the commander has on earth. His name is Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. To feel this scene, you have to know what these two old men are to each other. Roll the years back, 45 of them. 12 spies go up into Canaan. 10 come back and spread fear like sickness. The cities are fortified. The people are giants. We seemed like grasshoppers. And 2 men, only 2, stand against the tide of national panic. Joshua and Caleb. It was Caleb who quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." For that faith, the assembly talked of stoning them both. The 10 fearful spies did not live to see the land. The generation of fighting men that was counted in the census and refused it fell, year by year, across 40 years of wandering, until of that numbered generation only these 2 remained to cross the river. Through the campaigns of this book, Caleb must have been there somewhere among the ranks of Judah, an old lion among the young men. The book has not mentioned him once. He has not asked it to. Now the fighting is done, the land is being divided, and Caleb comes to collect on a 45-year-old promise. Listen to him. The speech is preserved whole, and it is magnificent. You know, he says to Joshua, what the Lord said to Moses concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses sent me to spy out the land, and I brought him word again as it was in my heart. My brothers who went up with me made the heart of the people melt, yet I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance for you and your children forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. Wholly followed. That phrase is stitched through Caleb's whole story, 3 times in this one speech, and everywhere else the scriptures mention him. It is his signature, not perfectly gifted, not famously used. Wholly followed. There was never a season of Caleb, the record insists, that belonged to something else. And then comes the part of the speech I want to hand, especially to some of you, you who have more road behind you than ahead, you who wonder whether the meaningful assignments have all been given to younger hands. And now, behold, Caleb says, the Lord has kept me alive, just as he said, these 45 years. And now, behold, I am this day 85 years old. I am still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength now is as my strength was then, for war and for going and coming. There is no retirement in that voice. But hear what he credits. Not his diet, not his discipline, though the man was plainly made of old leather and iron. The Lord has kept me alive. Caleb's strength at 85 is not a boast. It is a receipt. God preserved him so that a specific promise could be kept to a specific man, and Caleb has been holding the ticket the whole time. And now, the request. Now give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day. Give me this mountain. And not just any mountain. Caleb asks for Hebron, and the text reminds us what was there. The Anakim, the giants themselves, the very race whose size had melted the 10 spies into grasshoppers, still held that hill country, with great fortified cities. Unlike the tribal allotments assigned by Lot, Caleb steps forward and asks for the very hill country promised to him. And it is the one piece of land with giants still on it. At 85, you heard on that day, he says, that the Anakim were there, with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out just as the Lord said. For 45 years, Caleb has been remembering the giants, not with fear, with appetite. The 10 spies saw the giants and measured themselves. Caleb saw the same giants and measured God. There are 2 ways to carry an old unfinished battle, as a wound or as an appointment. Caleb carried his as an appointment. And Joshua, his last old comrade from the numbered generation, blesses him and gives him Hebron. And the record states the ending without drama, the way it states sunrises. And Caleb drove out from there the 3 sons of Anak. The giants that had frightened a whole army were driven from that hill country under the leadership of an 85-year-old man who wholly followed the Lord. And the land, the text adds softly, had rest from war. Now let me set this stone down carefully, because it is a stone for the later years, and stones for the later years must be handled with truth. I will not tell you that a specific mountain is certainly waiting for you, or that God has promised you a task he has not named. Scripture does not authorize me to hand out Caleb's promise as if it were addressed to everyone. Caleb received a particular word and waited on that particular word. What this chapter does teach, and teaches beyond doubt, is this: God's faithfulness does not diminish with age, and neither, in his eyes, does a person's worth. The Bible keeps no shelf for finished people. Abraham was 75 when the journey began. Moses was 80 at the burning bush. Anna, advanced in years, was still worshipping and serving in the temple when she lived to see the infant Messiah with her own eyes. The psalmist says of the faithful, they still bear fruit in old age. Whatever the years have taken, they have not taken your standing with God, and they have not taken the possibility of faithful work, whether large or quiet, or almost unseen. The later chapters are still chapters. In this book, some of the best ground was taken last by the oldest hands. And if you are younger, this stone still asks you one long question. What kind of old man, what kind of old woman are you becoming, one ordinary decision at a time? Caleb at 85 was simply Caleb at 40 compounded. The wholehearted following came first, for decades, in obscurity, through other people's fears. The mountain came last. It usually does. Evening settles over Gilgal, over the surveyor's lines and the tribal lots. Somewhere south, in the high country, an old man is walking his new land in the dusk, giants ahead of him, 45 kept years behind him. 10 stones stand. 2 remain, and they are gentle ones. The war chapters of our night are over. Rest the way Caleb must have rested on the eve of his mountain. Not because the giants were small, because the promise was old and tested and still held. Stone 11. The cities of refuge and the altar that was misunderstood. The land has rest from war now, and it is here, in the quiet after the fighting, that the book of Joshua shows us 2 of its gentlest treasures. Most readers hurry past them on the way to the famous farewell. We will not hurry. These 2 small stories are about what a nation of God does with its peace, and it turns out that one of the first things it does is build mercy into the map. Here is the first story. The Lord said to Joshua, "Appoint the cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you through Moses, that the manslayer who strikes any person without intent or unknowingly may flee there. They shall be your refuge from the avenger of blood." To feel what this meant, you have to understand the justice of that ancient world. There was no modern police force, no prison system, no centralized court of appeal. When a person was killed, justice fell to the family. The nearest kinsman took up the duty of avenger of blood, and he pursued the killer, and the old custom of the whole region was simple and terrible. Blood for blood. But that custom had a flaw the size of the human heart. It could not tell the difference between murder and accident. The scriptures themselves give the picture, and it is painfully ordinary. 2 neighbors go into the forest to cut wood. One swings his axe, and the head flies from the handle and strikes his friend, and the friend dies. No hatred. No plan. A loose axe head on an ordinary morning. And yet, by sundown, an avenger is on the road, grief in his chest and a blade in his hand. Into that world, God draws 6 circles of mercy. 6 cities spread with care across the land, 3 west of the Jordan, 3 east. Kedesh in the north, Shechem in the center, Hebron in the south, and their 3 sisters across the river. Look at the spacing on a map, and you can see the intention. From nearly any point in the land, a running man could reach one of them. Later, Jewish tradition imagined those roads kept broad and clear and marked, so that no one fleeing for his life would lose the way. Mercy, in Israel, was never supposed to be remote. And what waited at the end of the road? Listen to the procedure, because every step of it is grace made practical. The manslayer shall flee to one of these cities, and shall stand at the entrance of the gate of the city, and explain his case to the elders of that city. Then they shall take him into the city, and give him a place, and he shall remain with them. He stands at the gate and tells his story, and they take him in first, trial later, in due order, before the congregation. The city sheltered him until the truth could be established, and if the killing was found to be without intent, he remained there, safe, building a life inside the walls of sanctuary. And there was one more provision, and it may be the strangest and loveliest detail in the whole arrangement. The man stayed in the city of Refuge until the death of the high priest. And when the high priest died, the text says he could go home. Free, the avenger had no more claim on him. One death, and a man who could never undo what he had done walked out of sanctuary and back into his own fields. That detail has been treasured for centuries. Christians have long heard in it an echo of the gospel, the death of a high priest, opening a road home for people who could not open it themselves. The old law does not say that. It simply gives the provision and moves on. But it is a resonance believers have heard across the centuries, and I hand it to you the way I have handed you everything tonight, as something heard rather than something proved. Now think about who these cities were for. Not for the innocent, exactly. The man in Refuge had killed someone. A family was shattered because of his hand. He was not a murderer, but neither could he pretend that nothing had happened through his hand. He was that third thing our hearts know well and our categories handle badly. He was a person who could not undo what he had done. Perhaps that is you, in some quieter way. Not an axe head, but a word that flew loose and struck someone you loved. A decision made in good faith that wounded people anyway. Harm you truly caused and truly never intended, the kind that an accusing memory pursues down the years like an avenger who does not tire. For that exact ache, God zoned 6 cities into his holy land. Justice for the deliberate. The scriptures are firm on that. But for the sons and daughters of tragedy and mistake, a gate, an ear, a room, a life. And the echo carries into the New Testament. The letter to the Hebrews speaks of those who have fled for refuge to take hold of the hope set before us, and generations of readers have caught, in that phrase, the sound of running feet on the road to Kedesh. There is a refuge, the old preachers used to say, whose gate is never shut, and whose shelter does not depend on the death of any priest, because it rests on one who lives forever. The cities were mercy drawn on a map. Christ, they said, is mercy with a name. Hold that, and let me tell you the second story. It stands near the first in the closing movement of the book, and the two can be heard together. The first is about mercy toward the burdened. The second is about mercy toward the misunderstood. The war is over, and Joshua summons the soldiers of the eastern tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. Their inheritance lies back across the Jordan, but years ago they promised Moses they would cross over and fight beside their brothers until the whole land was won. They kept that promise to the last battle. Now Joshua blesses them. You have not forsaken your brothers these many days, he says, and sends them home with honor. And on their way home, at the border, beside the Jordan, they build an altar, a huge one. The text calls it an altar of imposing size, visible far across the river valley. And the western tribes hear of it and misread it completely and nearly destroy themselves over the misreading. Because in Israel there was to be one altar of sacrifice, at the tabernacle, before the Lord. A rival altar meant rebellion, idolatry, and everyone remembered how the sin of Achan had ended, wrath on the whole congregation. So the text delivers a sentence that should chill us with how fast it happens. And when the people of Israel heard of it, the whole assembly of the people of Israel gathered at Shiloh to make war against them. To make war against their own brothers, against the men who had just spent years fighting beside them, on the strength of a report about a structure whose purpose nobody had asked. But then, on the edge of catastrophe, somebody chooses to talk first. Israel sends a delegation across the river, Phinehas, the priest, and 10 chiefs, and yes, their opening words are hot with accusation. What breach of faith is this, they demand. But they came, with words before weapons, and that made room for one of the most moving answers in the Old Testament. The eastern tribes reply, and you can hear their voices shaking. The mighty one, God the Lord. The mighty one, God the Lord. He knows, and let Israel itself know. If it was in rebellion or in breach of faith against the Lord, do not spare us today. And then the truth comes out, and it is the opposite of the accusation. We did it from fear, they say. Fear that in time to come your children might say to our children, "What have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Jordan is a border between us. Your children might make our children cease to worship the Lord." So we built this altar, not for offerings, not for sacrifice, but to be a witness between us and you, and between our generations after us, that we too belong to the Lord. Do you see it? The altar was not a door out of the faith. It was an anchor into it. Not rebellion, but the fear of being forgotten by the family of God. The thing that looked like betrayal was actually longing. And when Phinehas and the chiefs heard it, the text says, it was good in their eyes, and they blessed God, and went home, and the talk of war dissolved like morning mist. The eastern tribes named the altar Witness, saying, "It is a witness between us that the Lord is God." One conversation. That is what stood between Israel and a war over a misunderstanding, and how much stands on that same narrow bridge in our own lives. The friend whose silence you have read as coldness, the relative whose choice you have filed as rejection, the believer whose different way of honoring God you have quietly labeled compromise. Before the verdict, this stone asks, did you cross the river? Did you ask what the altar was for? The proverb says the one who states his case first seems right, until the other comes and examines him. So many wars, the great ones and the ones inside families, are wars against altars that were actually named Witness. So here are the two mercies of the 11th stone, lying side by side like tools in a case. A gate for the burdened and pursued, and a question for the misjudged. A nation is not made safe by its walls, this chapter says. It is made safe by its gates and its bridges. The night is deep now and gentle. Somewhere on the darkened map of that old land, 6 cities keep their lamps lit beside the roads, and by the Jordan a great stone altar stands unburnt and unbloodied, holding nothing but a meaning. 11 stones. 1 left. If a runner is loose somewhere in your memory tonight, some old accusation with tireless feet, hear the good news of this stone. The road is clear. The gate is manned. The elders are already listening. Run there and rest. The city takes you in. Stone 12. As for me and my house. A long time afterward, the text says, when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all their surrounding enemies, and Joshua was old and well advanced in years. It is the Bible's gentle phrase for a life that has come to its last mild weather. Years have passed since Caleb took his mountain. The tribes are settled. Children have been born who never saw the Jordan stopped or heard the trumpets at Jericho. And in his inheritance in the hill country, an old soldier feels the evening coming and does the last great thing of his life. He calls for all Israel one final time. Twice, actually. the book gives him two farewells. The first is to the leaders, the elders and judges and officers, and it is a commander's farewell, full of charge and warning. You have seen all that the Lord your God has done, he tells them. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Be very strong, therefore. The words God pressed into him at the Jordan, he now presses into them. And then he says something that only a man at the end of every road can say with full authority. I'm about to go the way of all the earth, and you know in your hearts and souls, all of you, that not one word has failed of all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you. All have come to pass for you. Not one of them has failed. Not one word has failed. Weigh that sentence. It comes from a man who carried the promise through 40 wilderness years, and then through every battle that followed before he ever saw the land at rest. He buried a generation of friends. He was handed an impossible succession and a flooded river in the same season of his life. If anyone had earned the right to say some of the promises came through, it was Joshua. Instead, at the end of all his evidence, not one word has failed. The second farewell is the one the world remembers. Joshua gathers all the tribes, not to his home, but to Shechem, and the choice of that place is itself a sermon. Shechem is where God first appeared to Abraham in this land, centuries before, and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." Shechem is where the nation stood between the mountains after the valley of Achor and heard the covenant read aloud. The old man calls his people back to the oldest promise ground in the country. Endings, he understands, belong at beginnings. And there they presented themselves before God, and Joshua speaks. But listen to what he does. He does not tell his own story. Thus says the Lord, he begins, and then God himself, through the old man's voice, walks the nation back down the long road. I took your father Abraham from beyond the river. He sent Moses. I brought your fathers out of Egypt. You went over the Jordan, and I gave the men of Jericho into your hand. And then a sentence of pure grace, the summary of everything. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. Everything, the speech says, from first to last, was given. And gifts of that size come with one honest question attached, and Joshua, with the last strength of his life, sets it before them. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. Choose this day. Notice that Joshua does not pretend there is no choice. Other loyalties are always on offer, then and now. The old gods beyond the river, the new gods of the neighborhood, whatever promises safety or pleasure or belonging at a better price. Joshua names the options like a man laying them on a table in daylight. And then, before anyone can answer, he answers for himself, and the words have been carved over doorways and spoken at kitchen tables for 3,000 years. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. As for me and my house, he cannot choose for the nation. He cannot choose for the next generation. At the end of his long life, Joshua claims exactly the territory every one of us actually governs. One heart, one home, and the people answered him, "Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord." And the text records that Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua. His household's declaration became part of a wider faithfulness that held through his generation. Never believe that a quiet, faithful home is a small thing. Its influence outruns its walls, further than anyone inside can see. Joshua makes a covenant with the people that day and writes it in the book, and then, one last time, this builder of memorials reaches for what he has always reached for. He takes a great stone and sets it up there under the terebinth, beside the sanctuary of the Lord. Behold, he says, this stone shall be a witness against us, for it has heard all the words of the Lord that he spoke to us. A stone that heard. The man whose story began beside 12 stones from a riverbed ends it by raising one final stone at Shechem. From first to last, Joshua trusted the future to remembering. And then, the quiet lines. After these things, Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in his own inheritance, in the hill country of Ephraim. The servant of the Lord. Read that title slowly, because the whole book just closed a circle inside it. On the first page, in the days after the funeral, the title belonged to another. Moses, my servant, is dead, God said, and Joshua was only the assistant, the man outside the light. Sure, he could never be what his master was. 110 years old. At the end of every promise kept, the scripture writes over Joshua the very title he thought he could never carry. Not the second Moses, not the lesser man, the servant of the Lord, complete in the only title he had ever truly needed. The assistant made it home. And the book adds one more burial, like a stone set beside his. The bones of Joseph, whose final request had waited through the long centuries in Egypt and had been carried out by Moses when the Exodus began, are laid at last in Shechem, in the ground Jacob bought. Even the dead in this book receive their inheritance. Not one word has failed. The 12th stone is set. The memorial of our night is complete. 12 stones standing together in the dark. The mourner who was told to arise. The scarlet cord. The river that stopped. The stones of remembering. The night of the drawn sword. The 7 days of silence. The heaviest stone, with its door of hope. The covenant kept to its own hurt. The day the sun stood still. The old man and his mountain. The gates of refuge and the altar, named witness. And now the last, the great stone of Shechem, the choosing stone. As for me and my house.
And now, dear friend, the building is finished, and only the resting remains. Before you sleep, let me read you the sentence this entire book was written to reach. It sits near the end of the conquest, 2 verses that gather up everything. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. Rest on every side. That is the destination of the whole story. Not the conquest. Not the victories. The conquest was only ever the road. Rest was the country. And the letter to the Hebrews, looking back across the centuries at this very book, adds one more quiet wonder. It says that the rest Joshua gave was real, but it pointed beyond itself, for there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. A deeper rest, held open by the one who carried Joshua's own name. Yeshua. The Lord is salvation. The seed we planted in our first hour has bloomed at last, and Christians have long called him the greater Joshua, the one who said, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." This is Night Psalms, where the ancient words find the ones who need them. So do the last thing the old book teaches. 12 stones stand in the dark of this night, and there is room beside them for one more. Yours. Take whatever this night has given you, one sentence, one scene, the cord in the window, the feet in the river, the old man asking for his mountain, and set it down beside the others, a small stone of your own, remembering. You do not need words for it. Setting it down is the prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for the God of Joshua, who names our losses before he heals them, who opened the Jordan when his people stepped forward in faith, who keeps oaths to the undeserving, and who has not let one good word fall to the ground. Take every listener under this sky tonight, the grieving and the newly burdened, the ones facing walls and the ones remembering giants, and give them the deeper rest those ancient promises pointed toward, through Jesus Christ, who brings his people home. Amen. The lamps of the camp are out. The river is quiet in its banks. The stones will keep the watch, and the one they witness to keeps you. Not one word has failed. Rest now on every side.